and thanks for tuning in to MAR Talks. My name is Carrie Cabers, and I'm the founder of Mums Against Racism Canada. I am grateful to be able to not only live and raise my children on the traditional unceded territories of the Lekwungen peoples, now known as Victoria, BC, but to also do this really important work here. And this month, in honor of International Women's Day and the UN International Day of the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, our theme is revolutionary mothering. And our theme is inspired by the book with the same name, Revolutionary Mothering, Love on the Front Lines, a co-edited anthology by Mai'a Williams, Alexis, Pauline, Gumbs, and China Martens. Revolutionary mothering explores the idea that mothering not only means taking care of one's children, but it also means building community and ensuring survival for the future generation. A generation that will stand on the shoulders of those who paved the way before them and who will continue the resistance against oppression. It's this radical act of caretaking and supporting life that's fundamental to raising kids who will become equity champions and builders of revolutionary communities of love, diversity, and inclusion. To kick off our month of interviews with revolutionary motherers, we thought it was fitting to start with some of our very own MAR mums. So today we're talking with Symbia Barnaby, our MAR Healthcare Advocacy Team co-lead. Symbia Barnaby is a Mi'kmaq and Haida wisdom translator. She's known as Gugajung as her traditional name, Symbia Barnaby as her English name, and Warrior Woman for her spirit name. She is MAR Canada's Healthcare Advocacy Co-Team Lead, a licensed practical nurse, a birth and postpartum doula, a disability advocate, and an activist. She is a single mother of 6 children and lives in northern BC. Hi, Symbia. Thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Hi, Carrie. I'm super honored to be here.
So for this series, we're asking each of our revolutionary motherers the same 3 questions. So let's just get right into those questions. Our first question is, what does revolutionary mothering mean to you?
Is it okay, Carrie, that I just do a land acknowledgement for where I am as well? I just want to make sure, and then we can go into the questions. So I am coming to you today from the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Tsimshian people, also known, or today known as Prince Rupert. So to the first question that you were asking about what does revolutionary mothering mean to me, I had to sit with this one. And when you first asked me to do the interview, I had a couple of tears come down thinking, oh, wow, like this is such an honor to be able to be interviewed, and, an honor to have somebody that thinks of me so highly, because sometimes I don't think what I'm doing is so revolutionary. So I had to sit with it for a little while and be curious as to what it meant to me. And in keeping with who I am, I went to the dictionary to go, okay, like, what does the true meaning of revolution mean? So I understood it a little bit better about what it is that we're doing and how we're making an impact. And for me, one of the biggest definitions that stood out was being able to go against what the status quo is, right? So what's the status quo? And being able to inspire people from one thought process to the next. So helping that shift, which is what we're doing today through MAR shifts, but holding true to that perspective that there can be a better way to, and a more inclusive way forward is what really stood out for me. So it's not only about caring for our own children, but the action, like informing our actions for the future that are going to be how is it going to impact other people's children as well, and that the other thing that really stuck out for me too was how sacred the role of mothering is. And I think that there's times where we've lost touch with how sacred that role is, and also how spiritual that role is. We're chosen to be that vessel for mom or for babes to come through from spirit world to here. And think of how sacred that is, you know. Yeah, that to me, it's helping to change the narrative where we're at right now, to be more inclusive, more more loving, more authentic, to hold space for our children, and not just our own children, but each other's children. Yeah, that's, yeah. I know that that's a lot of mixed, but you know, like I was thinking about it, like I was thinking about my own family when I was thinking about this. My grandmother, things that happen with my grandmother, and then things that happen with my mother, and things that happen with me. And through history with Indigenous people and Canada. And I think about, you know, I'm the first generation of our family born not going into residential school or being, you know, removed through 60 scoop. So we're in this position that to be able to love our children freely and parent our children freely is something that wasn't afforded to generations and my ancestors for a few generations back because of residential school and the war. So to me, you know, just being able to have that freedom to love them and to parent them and to care for them, you know, is an honor, and it's how sacred it is. And then also that, you know, because of intergenerational trauma, we have a huge duty to be able to change this, so that, you know, pain that came from generations before us don't land on our own children, or that we can minimize it as much as possible.
Well, and I've obviously heard you speak before and have had been blessed to have many conversations with you around this. And this is in part why I asked you to participate in this series, because, and it goes to our next question of, in what ways do you practice revolutionary mothering? And I think that, as you say, having had the intergenerational trauma for generations before you, the act of parenting and loving your children in the way that you are now is revolutionary. So I hope I didn't steal your thunder on your answer there, but what if you have other ways that you connect to, do you practice revolutionary mother, maybe within your family or outside of your family unit?
I had to sit with this question too when it was asked. I think because of, so I, like Carrie, when she introduced me, you know that I have 6 children. Out of those 6 children, I have 5 children with some type of disability. And one of the things that I do outside of our home is advocacy on a disability, like around disability and around inclusion. And it's not, I look at it, you know, my motivation came from my own children. But what's kept me going was getting to know families and their children and thinking, how can I make a difference for their children and my children, and making it like our world a more inclusive and more supportive space? Because there are people out there who are suffering because, you know, needlessly, because there are systematic things that need to be addressed that could affect them more positively. So that's one of the things is every space that I'm invited, I look around, you know, and I think, whose voice isn't at this table? Whose face isn't at this table? And why aren't they here? And what kind of perspective could they be holding that needs to be shared in these spaces? Because Indigenous voices haven't always been invited to the table. And, you know, now a big part of what I've been doing is building relationships with people and friendships with people. And that's part of what's helping to bring me to some of those tables. And it's important not to just have a seat at the table, but to have your voice at the table. And that's been one of the biggest things. I think I went to this webinar a little while back about healing intergenerational trauma. And one of the conversations was around residential school. And we're listening, and I was thinking, okay, some of this makes sense, or most of this makes sense. Some of it, like none of it feels new to me. Most of it's stuff that I put into practice already. And I remember looking at the side of the screen where there was conversations happening in the background of the webinar, so that when the people within the class were getting to share perspectives. And there was this one woman who was a residential school survivor. And one of the things we were discussing stoicism. And how that's one of the traits that many Indigenous people are known for, is stoicism, not to necessarily look you in the eye, but to be stone-faced, but to listen, you know, and not being super responsive to what's verbally responsive to what's happening. And so in the chat, I remember, and it stuck out so much, and I just started crying. She said, in residential school, we taught each other was to not speak, and to not, you know, not speak and not feel. And that was something to be able to survive, right? So then with those traits, that's what kept them alive, and for them to be able to have children and then grandchildren. But it's a trait of survival, right? Not of something to thrive. So when I look at it right now, being invited into those spaces and having a seat at the table is important, but also having that voice is super important, because traditionally the only way people survived was to not have a voice, otherwise that they could be killed, or, you know, or injury could happen to them. So for me, that's been super important, is to not just show up to those tables, you know, and to put my fear aside, you know, because sometimes, you know, we as moms, and as, you know, people that are successful or considered successful, sometimes we think, or we go through that imposter syndrome, right? I don't believe that I have a right to be here, or I don't think that I've got anything to contribute to this space, and we want to shrink, right? Versus showing up, being present, sharing our truth and our authenticity, and sharing it with compassion with the people that are there, and with humility. So, you know, showing up, not only speaking on behalf of my own children, but children with disabilities throughout the province. So whenever I've been invited to those tables, like I said, I look around, see who's not at the table, what voices are missing, looking at, and when I'm there, showing up and actually speaking to what we're there to speak about.
You're such a revolutionary mother. So then for our last question, what advice do you have for those wanting to be allies and dismantlers of racism? What can you leave us with today?
So there's a couple things. One, I want people to know something about me personally, and then I'll go through some of the real like takeaways. Is I have 5 daughters. Out of those 5 daughters, 4 of them have disabilities. We live in a northern remote community. I'm a single parent, and we deal with poverty on and off through our family. This makes them some of the most vulnerable people within our province. So if we're going to do any kind of work, think about the most vulnerable people within the province, and try to do good by them, and make your decisions based on how are we going to impact and improve their lives. Because that's what I'm doing right now. That's a big part of my motivation, is reducing their vulnerability. How do I make it so that they are not victims of crime, or they're not victims of abuse or anything like that? Because statistically, all of those things, all the characteristics that they have, make them like high risk for those things to happen, like abuse or going missing or being murdered. So hold that in your mind. That's one of the step one, or one of the words of advice, is think about the most vulnerable people and make decisions based on that, and show up in those spaces based on people with vulnerability. The next one is to hold space for people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Don't take over. We see that sometimes because people have the best, the best intentions, but what ends up happening is they end up speaking over or trying to explain to other people, or to non-Indigenous or non-Black people, and to have humility going into these spaces. Know that you have to check your ego at the door. Humility is super, super important when you're on your anti-racism journey. Going and being teachable, willing to be teachable in those spaces is super important. There's another one. Oh, amplify. Obviously, amplify. Sometimes it's so obvious, but amplify Black and Indigenous voices. Credit Black and Indigenous voices. That's super important. When there's works that have been that are already made that are out there, making sure that you're giving credit for where you're finding some of your resources. Invite them into spaces that your influence gives you privilege to enter. So making sure that you reach out when you're at those tables, looking around, like I said, looking around who's not there, and making sure that in the future that you're bringing in those voices to make sure that their voices are heard and their perspectives are considered and heard. I take what Indigenous and Black people say for face value. I've had some spaces where I've said, this has been my experience, and I've had people say, no, I don't think that that's how it actually works. And it's one of the most, hurtful and damaging things to be discounted or discredited, because that's traditionally what's happened. And that kind of goes hand in hand with having humility. This one came up, I heard it the other day, and I was just like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be bringing this into every space that I come into now, that anti-racism has to happen before cultural safety. So understanding how important your cultural or your anti-racism journey is long before you start to try and interact with Indigenous or Black communities, because you inadvertently can cause more trauma or more drama or more hurt, and burn bridges with people. And it's not our role as Indigenous, Black, or people of color to educate and to give you all the information and all the resources, right? That journey is on you. And it's an important and very sacred role too, to be able to do that unlearning and decolonization. So, making sure that you do your work before you come into these spaces so that you're not causing more trauma is super, super important. Yeah. And then the other one is have curiosity, curiosity and respect. That's respect is one of the highest teachings as Indigenous people that we teach, not only to our children, but to each other, and is to show up with respect for each other. And I think, respect and humility come hand in hand, know and understand that you're going in there as a guest, and that, put it into perspective. You're a guest on this land. You're a guest to these events. You're a guest to these tables, and we want to make sure that everybody's included.
Thank you, Symbia. So you can follow Symbia on Instagram at Symbia Barnaby, so the at Symbia Barnaby, or connect with her in our Moms Against Racism private Facebook group. She is a wealth of knowledge and just a beautiful human being inside and out, and is definitely there for you. So again, thank you so much for all the revolutionary mothering you do within your own family, your community, within our community. The world needs these radical acts of love. So have a great day.